Tell me if you've ever been here before. You're enjoying a show when suddenly a new character is introduced to you. They are quickly established to be a very introverted and shy type of character, one who has troubles with self-image and self-confidence. Above all, however, they are a coward who almost never seems to work up the courage to do something by themselves. You find yourself frustrated at this character's lack of a backbone. It's not just that this character lacks confidence, they lack self-respect. They lack any sort of courage at all whatsoever. It's frustrating to see them fumble through romances, opportunities, and defining moments in the show. They are established to have the potential to be great if they would only overcome their fears. And yet, they never seem to do so, at least not by their own choice. Some people may think of Megumi from JJK, or perhaps Bocce from Bocce the Rock. However, these are not characters which ever frustrated me personally, at least not for the reasons I listed. In fact, the character who pushed me to write about this archetype in the first place is a character I don't even dislike. It's just that there's one consistent, annoying, cowardly trait they have which has occasionally pissed me off while watching the show. More of a, this character would be so perfect if they were not so annoying sometimes. If you've watched To Be Hero X, I think Yang Cheng fits into this category of a character who is too cowardly. But I'm not going to go into spoilers just yet. Instead, I want to talk more about this specific archetype of a cowardly character. The character whose fatal flaw is that they are a coward, but who is otherwise extremely competent. A character so frustratingly in their own way that you're pleading with the author to allow them to develop some sort of self-respect or backbone and just move on from that cowardly character arc that they have. But what if they never do? And how can we make that cowardly character compelling instead of annoying? And I hope none of you are going to be annoyed by what I say next, but I want to compel you to take a look at today's sponsor, Aura. I want you guys to think about a time when a company you trusted announced a data breach involving your personal information. What went through your mind as you processed the news? What actions did you take to respond? And most importantly, what actions did you not take to respond? Because not responding or taking any action in this moment right now could leave you vulnerable to future data breaches. After all, hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. So if you live in America like I do, you might want to listen to what I have to say. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from national public data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birth dates. And members of the hacker group have reportedly released this information for free online. I don't know about you guys, but as a person who has had their passwords stolen in the past, that sort of thing is incredibly terrifying to me. Oftentimes we think it can't happen to us until it does, and we're left without any idea of what to do or who to call. Even if you're doing your best to keep your identity safe, things like this can still happen. And by the time you realize it has happened, it'll already be too late. That's why it's so important to get ahead of it and prepare for the worst. If you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a huge wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable online than you are right now. But for me personally, I'm not too worried because I use Aura. Aura alerts me if my phone number, email, or social security number is on the dark web. They're going to let me know fast if anyone tries to use this information to get access to my credit or bank accounts. They also give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario ever happen to me again. There's also a ton of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one easy-to-use app. You can go to my link, aura.com/scrit, to try 14 days for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now because not only is national public data not going to do anything to help you, they're probably not going to face any repercussions for this leak. And if there aren't any repercussions, that more than likely means it's going to happen again. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/scrit and try 2 weeks for free. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. Let's bring it back to the question, how do we make cowardice compelling? Well, the simple truth is that you really can't make cowardice compelling. but you can make courage and bravery compelling. Most cowardly characters might be scared, but in order to make them compelling, we must offer them a moment where they are pushed to take action despite their glaring flaw. Because at the core of every compelling character is a drive and motivation to take action which moves the story forward. The cowardly character archetype comes in many forms, and they don't always need to permanently grow beyond that initial flaw of cowardice. They just need to occasionally show moments of bravery. And they don't always need to be an action hero or an everyman who becomes a badass later on. Sometimes this cowardly character is best reserved as a comic relief or a straight man to the terrors inherent within the stories they are portrayed within. Let's take Shaggy and Scooby from Scooby-Doo as an example. Both of these characters can fit into their own versions of the cowardly archetype, and they are likely the first introduction many of us have had with the coward archetype. And yet I've never heard anyone criticize Scooby-Doo for being annoying or cowardly. If anything, I've heard people criticize Scooby's nephew Scrappy-Doo for not being cowardly. That's because Scooby-Doo as a concept is cowardice done right. Both Shaggy and Scooby present the audience with a much-needed self-insert, where we have Velma, Fred, and Daphne daringly going into haunted mansions, monster dens, and venturing into dark alleyways. We have Shaggy and Scooby taking the role of the more reasonable people who say, "Fuck that. There's no way I'm about to go into a crack den with a pale stranger who's beckoning me inside." Of course, they probably use different words, but I think you get my point. Here's where I think Scooby-Doo excels in creating a cowardly character, though. We would think that with every single episode, the audience would slowly get worn down by the fact that Shag and Scoob are almost always afraid in the show. It always starts and ends the same. The gang finds a mystery to investigate. Fred says it's time to split up and search for clues. Shag and Scoob say, "No way, man. This place is scary." And one of the other three members of the gang offer them a Scooby snack so that they will have the courage to push forward. And while this might sound like a typical video essayist jumping the shark to make a crazy, outlandish claim, that single Scooby snack is the key to writing a good cowardly character. Let's think about this objectively and with an open mind first. The Scooby snack is a very simple yet effective plot device for the show to move the action forward and provide a valid motivation for our cowardly characters to take action in the show instead of what they would rather do, which is stay behind and contribute nothing to the plot. That one single plot device is the reason that we don't typically hate Shaggy and Scooby. They go from cowardly characters of inaction to compelling characters of action. We see that they're not motivated by solving mysteries like the rest of the gang, but they are motivated by food, and that's just as good of a motivation as anything else. Additionally, they're played for comedic effect. Their fear does not go away just because they've eaten a Scooby snack, and it's not meant to be taken seriously either. There's no special power or character development granted by the Scooby snack. It's just an incentive to take action, and nothing more. And now, the writers get to figure out what sort of wacky hijinks the two of them get into while they're splitting up and searching for clues. Shaggy and Scooby are often the ones who end up catching the villain by the end of every episode. At the very least, they are often the first to encounter the villain of the story, leading to their iconic chase scenes. But regardless of whether or not they take action, that fear is still present. Here's where I want to establish another principle about cowardly characters. They're only annoying when they're actually cowards, and they're actually courageous when they're compelling. Because courage without fear is simply recklessness. And the presence of action in the face of fear is by definition courage. Courage the Cowardly Dog is another show with a cowardly character done right, and it's probably also another example of the first time we ever got introduced to the cowardly character archetype. Courage isn't actually cowardly at all, though. He's courageous in every single episode that he's in. Yes, in the beginning of every episode, much like Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, Courage the Cowardly Dog is afraid of whichever ghoul is haunting nowhere that week. However, it's when Muriel is put in danger where courage lives up to his name. He's always pushed to action, not because he is unafraid, but in spite of his fear. No one is ever annoyed by Courage the Cowardly Dog. In fact, I think there are plenty of people with fond memories of the show. It's a very well-made show which mixes a lot of media and sometimes genuinely scares us. Editor, play like the Return the Slab one that scarred me as a child.
This night you will be visited by 3 plagues, each worse than the last. Return the slab.
Ha! Nice try, Professor.
That one scared me a lot. Anyways, where was I? We're able to empathize with Courage's fears. We're also able to empathize with his emotions and his motivations. Of course, someone would be driven to take courageous action when their family is threatened. Courage will never be courageous for himself, but he will always be courageous if it means protecting the ones he loves. And yes, once again, it sounds silly to say out loud about a children's show, but at its core, that is what Courage the Cowardly Dog is about. It's about protecting a found family and overcoming your fears to be greater than you would otherwise be by yourself. Rising to the occasion, not just to destroy your enemies, but sometimes to find out that the things which scared us are not as terrifying as they once appeared. Many of the episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog are not about Courage defeating a terrible, evil monster. A lot of them are about Courage discovering he had nothing to fear in the first place. Oftentimes, when he faces his fears, he will end up helping more than just Muriel and Eustace. Courage the Cowardly Dog taught us as children that when we face our fears, there's nothing we cannot achieve. But let's move on to some of the examples that I would consider to be more annoying. Ones which seem to get fan bases in a frenzy about how annoying their characters are. And of course, we have a returning guest here. The first one I want to talk about is Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. Now, that's not to say that every moment Zenitsu is on screen, he's the most annoying character ever and just ruins every scene he touches, although he does do that quite often. Heck, I don't even really personally hate this character as much as other people seem to. However, I do understand the hate, and it perfectly is in alignment with what I'm talking about in this video when it comes to writing a cowardly character. We might think that Zenitsu is driven to take action just like all of the other previously mentioned good cowardly characters, right? Well, not really. You see, the one thing which holds Zenitsu back from being a character people find compelling is that his actions are not taken willingly. He does not have any agency when it comes to being courageous, and when he does have agency, he chooses to be a coward instead, no matter what the situation is. That's because the only time he seems to be courageous is when he's asleep and his body is moving on its own. That's not really all that compelling because he's not a character making a conscious decision to overcome his fears. Zenitsu remains a coward for the bulk of the story, and an annoying one at that. Because on top of being a coward, Zenitsu is also just a self-interested asshole. He's just not a good person in any sense of the word, and there's really almost nothing to like about him. However, I do know that there is an arc in the final chapters of Demon Slayer where we finally get to see Zenitsu come to terms with his fear and learn to use his abilities while fully awake. I think that's fine, but I also think it comes a little bit too late. Yes, we could still have his quirk of being a better fighter in his sleep than he is when he's awake. However, I think the writers should have given him more moments of true courage early on to show that he is capable of taking action without relying on his trump card as a crutch. Just like the previous characters, Zenitsu is meant to be a comic relief, but the humor tends to fall flat because there really isn't anything to like about him outside of his extreme competence while taking a nap. Compare that to a similar character from Frieren, however, and we can see this principle at play once again. Stark is a compelling coward because we are introduced to his courage very early into his arc. Not only that, but his fears are valid. Being afraid of a massive dragon is entirely reasonable, even in the show's setting. It's also that same cowardice which prevented Stark from taking proper action before Frieren and Fern came across him. He's a character who struggles with self-image, which is another thing a lot of people can relate to. Not only that, but he is competent when he can overcome that fatal flaw. And this is exactly what we see in the show. It does not take more than a few episodes to establish who Stark is as a character, and we're shown very early on that Stark is a character who can be relied upon when the chips are down. Even though Stark is anti-confrontational, fearful of his own shadow, and a bit of a pathetic pushover, he could still break your spine in half if he needed to. He's a character who's driven to work hard because of his imposter syndrome, believing himself to be a lot less competent than he truly is. In addition, we're shown the parallels between him and his former master, a dwarf who was previously in the same party as Frieren, who rescued the world from a demon lord decades ago. We see that even the most courageous warrior was still afraid to stand against the monsters that he faced. We are reminded that there is no courage without fear or cowardice. We can all relate to that in some way. We all have moments where we've been afraid to take action, but do so anyway because we know it's what we must do. Sometimes we need to take a leap of faith and throw caution to the wind in a single moment of bravery in order to achieve our own desires. But what about cowards who are only cowardly when it comes to the people they love? What about cowardly characters in reference to romance? Well, it's here that we have, in my opinion, the most annoying coward archetype in fiction. Now, I could list off a ton of examples where this happens in anime. I mean, it's actually more of a rule than an exception in most romance anime. However, I want to talk about a Chinese anime called To Be Hero X, which isn't really a romance. In fact, it's a action show with a little bit of romance inside of it. If you've watched up to the 5th or 6th episode of To Be Hero X, I think you'll know why I think Yang Cheng is a bit annoying when it comes to this part of his character. Now, that's not to say that I think his character is bad or annoying overall. In fact, I think they have all the makings of a very well-written character in the show. They're often driven to action despite being a coward who lacks any sort of self-respect. And the writers do a great job of showing us where all of that insecurity actually comes from. So when I criticize Yang Cheng as a character, know that I am criticizing a very specific portion of his character in this instance, and it's surrounding his romance with Xia. From the very first moment we're introduced to Yang, we see his fatal flaw on full display. He's completely incapable of asking the girl he likes out to a concert. Now, this might actually be a fully relatable flaw for most people if it wasn't overdone to the point of lunacy. Because, you see, the show doesn't just stop at 1 or 2 moments where our character gets cock-blocked by another character. There's also several moments of self-sabotage, which had me screaming at my screen for how much of a pussy this dude is around the girl he likes. Like, dude, she's leaving all the signs out for you, and you're purposefully dodging every single attempt she makes to get together with you. Like, it's very clear that Xia likes Yang, and she's just waiting for him to ask her out. But holy fuck, this dude just does everything in his power to avoid taking his shot. He finds any and every excuse that he can. Heck, Xia literally invites him to the exact same concert he was planning to invite her to, and he just says, "Nah, I actually don't like that person's music." Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, she literally just asked this dude on a date, and he just ignores that and lies. For what purpose? These types of things never fucking happen in real life, because if they did, then that's exactly where every relationship would pretty much end. A girl is not going to keep going after you and making an effort like this after being rejected. At least not any girl that you would want to date. Heck, they might not even try that hard in the first place. Sometimes I just want to jump through the screen and shake characters like, "Listen here, motherfucker. You've had these tickets for weeks. If you don't ask her out, I'm going to throw you off a bridge. Do you hear me?" And I would say that this is admittedly a character who is it's still written well. Unfortunately, there are plenty of anime out there which completely fumble a good romance with the cowardly archetype. It's to the point that I actually genuinely pop off anytime there's a protagonist who's actually smooth with it and goes after his romantic interests, instead of being the whiniest little pussy on the face of the fucking planet. The problem I have with this specific archetype of the cowardly character is one of contrivancy. The other characters, namely the female love interests, are constantly made to bend over backward and change their personalities in an effort to continue loving the protagonist, instead of, I don't know, moving on. All the while, the protagonist seemingly does everything in his power to either fumble the bag or completely undo any romantic progress made between themselves and their love interest. I've already talked at length about how much I dislike romance stories which end when the two characters get together. You can see it on screen now. So I'll spare you the yapping session and just tell you to go watch my video on why you suck at writing romance. All of this to say that the cowardly character archetype is often one who is poorly written and often the source of ire for many people who have to sit through their unpleasant journey of avoiding conflict. Much like it is frustrating to watch our own progress as artists or writers stagnate because of the fear of failure. There's this idea that we must always be outdoing our previous efforts in a vain belief that we must always be better than the person we were yesterday. The truth is that our self-improvement can be blocked by our fears. We can delude ourselves into believing that inaction is better than failed action, forever wasting away the limited lifespans we have to live in our own cowardice. We are not courageous because we've never been given a valid reason to overcome the fear of failure. So take this moment to be courageous. Overcome the fear of failure. Allow your fear of death and unrealized potential to compel you towards action. Become a more compelling person in your own right. Open up a document and start writing.